Good evening and welcome. This is the People's Platform. Yesterday, the IMF reached a staff-level agreement on an extended fund facility arrangement with Sri Lanka of $2.9 billion US. What does this mean? What are the implications and ramifications? This IMF bailout, will Sri Lanka succeed in fulfilling its preconditions? Let's find out. Our guest tonight is Dr. Dunusingha, Senior Lecturer, Department of Economics at the University of Colombo. Good evening and welcome.
Good evening.
Dr. Dunusingha, $2.9 billion US, that's a lot of money, but the IMF isn't just going to give or hand over this money to the Sri Lankan government. A staff-level agreement essentially means that the IMF team will now have to go back to its board of directors, and in the meantime, the Sri Lankan government will have to go ahead with its economic reform program, and it will also have to placate its creditors and tell them, look, give us an assurance that our debt will be made sustainable. So speak to us about the nuances and what exactly this means when we say that the IMF and Sri Lanka have reached this staff-level agreement.
First of all, thank you for inviting to the show. And I think IMF made it clear in yesterday's media brief that basically they have reached an agreement at the staff level for a US dollar billion 2.9, and it will be disbursed on installment basis, or what we call the tranche, 1, 2, 3, like that, upon the completion of the reforms program. However, prior to that, it needs to obtain the approval from the board of directors, and for that they requested they need a kind of an assurance or the kind of an consensus that Sri Lankan government reach with the creditors, where the creditors basically help in achieving debt sustainability.
Sure.
So that is a precondition. So basically IMF requested Sri Lanka government to expeditiously basically engage with the creditors and reach the creditors and basically obtain this particular debt sustainability assurance.
Right.
And also prior to get the approval from the director board, it is also requested to initiate some of the reforms. I am sure that some of them appeared in the interim budget as well. So provided those conditions are fulfilled, we will be able to obtain this 2.9. As I mentioned earlier, we will not get it at once, so it won't be a kind of
one-off payment,
payments. Rather, it will be distributed throughout this 48 months. Of 48 months mean the 4-year period. So as we have seen in early occasions, generally 300 to 400 million US dollar per tranche,
right.
per tranche. That is generally the arrangements.
Okay, let's speak more in detail about the fact that this bailout package by the IMF is contingent upon or dependent upon the Sri Lankan authorities following through with certain conditions, preconditions towards economic recovery. There are 7 which have been highlighted here: raising fiscal revenue, providing social safety net programs for the poor and vulnerable, restoring price stability through data-driven monetary policy action, rebuilding foreign reserves, safeguarding financial stability, reducing corruption vulnerabilities. So, I mean, if you generally take a look at the way an economy should run, these essentially must be preconditions. I mean, there is no rocket science to this. I mean, reducing corruption vulnerabilities, this is almost common sense, but Sri Lanka has to now put in so much extra effort to ensure that these preconditions are met. So speak to us about the practical aspects of ensuring and enabling it in terms of also policy reform.
Yeah, definitely those reform package that they have introduced is really a challenging task to implement given the current context. In particular, when it comes to implementation, it will be painful to the people in the country, and as a result we will see some protest, and people may agitate, and some people may suffer a lot. So those things remain. Even now we can understand in a general context, if we go to IMF and request some fund, generally they provide it under certain conditions, and when those conditions are met, I mean those conditions are fulfilled, there are winners and losers in the economy. So we have it will be difficult at this moment. It will be really difficult because the reforms are from tax related to taxes, related to expenditure cuts, related to reforms of public I mean the state-owned enterprises.
Yeah.
So these are really challenging, and that is why even the IMF requested that all segments in the society must support this program, because unless we go ahead with this one, the situation will get worse further, and that will have a bigger impact to the general public.
Right.
And one important element in this time that IMF came out is that basically it highlighted the need for a social protection approach to protect the vulnerable groups in the society. That is, I think, we need to consider as a plus point, because we know that due to COVID and then the subsequent economic crisis have had basically a big impact to a certain segment in the society. They should be protected regardless of the economic reforms that we plan to continue. And at the same time, they have addressed for the first time the need for corruption-free society to obtain or restoring the economic prosperity, and in particular coming out of this crisis need a kind of a society which is free of corruption and bribes. So this is one of the, I think, demand from the Araga that many youth basically agitated against the widely spread corruption. So I think it is good that if we can introduce new institutions, new legal framework which are widely accepted around the world to tackle with this ongoing, I mean we continue to have this corrupt society or corruption related practices in this society, and we were not able to domestically come up with a solution for this. It is good that external forces finally push the government to introduce such mechanisms and laws. I think now, regardless of the government in power, definitely they have to come up with such laws and regulations and institutions which are in line with the UN framework. That is also a plus point. That means globally accepted anti-corruption laws and institutions will have to be introduced.
Absolutely. Also today, the second reading of the appropriation amendment bill was passed in Parliament with a majority. We see several changes. There's a 26% decrease in the defense figures reported. Health has seen a 3% increase, education a 4% decrease. Help us understand these figures. The government's objective is to reduce capital expenditure. Speak to us about these figures.
Yeah, I think it is a very good steps step in reducing the public expenditure at a time of this in a crisis of this nature, because it is, we know that government is not able to get the expected revenue, because economy get contracted right now, whether it is through the indirect taxes or the direct taxes. The revenue that it can collect remain very low. In such a context, it is good that we reallocate some of the expenditures to essential areas. In particular, cutting down defense expenditure is a plus sign, because we know that during the war, and the government provided various privileges to security forces as well as the officers and other personnels, and these things continued even after the war, thereby having a huge defense budget, and no government took measures to really cut down some of those expenditures. This time I think government has taken a step to reduce it. If government has certainly planned to reduce some of the expenditures leading to those providing privileges and other facilities, I think it is a plus point. And at the same time, right now we know you don't see security threat as such, I mean, compared to what we had earlier. So in that context, I think it is a good time to think of, to reduce the amount that we spend. We cannot, we cannot, I think, no longer bear a huge cost, huge expenditure for the defense sector. Similarly, I think for the health sector, certainly we know that we have to spend, so government has increased. Again, I am sure that limitedly on the capital side, but mostly into the recurrent in terms of purchasing medicine and other things. So these are, I think, these we have to do because in order to downsize the budget deficit, we cannot have a bigger budget deficit. One reason is that we have less revenue now, and also we cannot print money. I mean, there is now with the IMF, IMF basically insisted in having an independent central bank where the government or the Ministry of Finance cannot influence central bank action as such, in particular requesting funds through by printing money. So I think in that context, these measures, whether we like or not, we have to take at this moment in order to address this current economic crisis.
The Fitch Ratings Agency said that political instability will pose risks to the implementation of reforms and the distribution of IMF funding. How pivotal is it for us to ensure that political stability exists in Sri Lanka?
Yeah, I think it is very clear that we need to have a stable government, because as I mentioned earlier, even now when you look at the kind of reforms that we have to carry out, those require a wider support from almost all the political parties, and for that we need a stable government. If not, what happen is that we will stop half the way. So if it the case that we may not be able to get the funds that the IMF has committed right now, because after every 3 months or 4 months time, IMF team will come to Sri Lanka and assess the progress that we have made. Upon that, they will release the next tranche. Right. So that is how it basically go ahead. And I think Fitch Rating Agency is really correct, and even the IMF stressed that point. Political stability is the need of the time, and for that is why we need to have a basically a multi-party government, or the government that get the support of the other political parties, because one party alone cannot address this the address or carry out these reforms. Half the way it will stop. So we need to understand the situation, not just the political parties, but even the public, to provide the required support for the government to carry out these reforms successfully and get out of this crisis. Otherwise, it will further deepen. So I think this is serious. Now, even though we have we witness some level of what we call the normalcy at this moment, in terms of, we have fuel that we had a lot of difficulties in purchasing fuel earlier. We have LP gas. Earlier we had a lot of difficulties. So people may assume that okay, things look okay, but it is not the case. If you deeply look into the crisis, we are still in the crisis, and it is possible that this situation get worse. Okay, right. So we need to carefully manage ourselves out of this situation, and for that political stability is there. How we can achieve that? Is that through the election, or is that through the multi-party government that could be formed with the existing parliamentary, the parliament existing parties in the parliament? It is up to the politician to decide. Certainly, given the constraint that we have, it is quite clear that we are not able to go for a snap election as such at this moment. And in that context, I think it is the responsibility of political parties to, come into a sort of a consensus and work together. That is what the people of this nation basically expect from them.
Speaking of the need for a broader consensus, the Parliament today hosted a Twitter space on the topic, the Committee on Public Finance, of which Dr. Harsha De Silva is the chair. And he said that when certain decisions are made in cabinet, there is no analysis made when making these decisions. He said policies such as the ban on fertilizer, the tax reduction in 2019 were never properly analysed before making the decisions. And he added that these policies are very crucial to the public. Why can't leaders analyse the pros and cons and consequences of these decisions before they are being implemented? So this is the question that I'd like to now pose to you.
Yeah, I fully agree with Dr. Harsha De Silva, and at the same time, such analysis should have been requested by the Parliament. I mean, in that particular context. I mean, if the parliamentarian requested that when the budget, tax cuts was proposed, and basically table at the parliament, okay, we need an analysis.
Sure.
Then things should have avoided, no? So it didn't happen. So I mean, as a practice, whether it is the previous government or even the Yahapalana government, what we have seen is that there was no such practices. That is the lacking part. I think at least now onwards, if we can, what we call the institutionalize, that means through a parliamentary bill or in other forms, that each bill require in an independent analysis prior to get the approval either from the cabinet or the parliament, then we will, regardless of the government in power, we will get such an analysis. Now, I think these things, I mean, at least at this stage, it is good to start such practices and introduce such practices, because lack of such practices ended up us here in this crisis. So generally, even in India or even in some of the other developing countries, what we could see is that there is an independent body which basically carry out analysis with respect to nationally important policy decision. That means data driven or the evidence based policy making, we say.
Right.
So it is not happening here in Sri Lanka. I think we need to initiate that practice at least from this onwards, and we have proposed that politicians throughout the 74 years of independence, they have basically governed this country. They have failed. I think we have to agree that. That means the type of people that people elect to the parliament, and then out of that some number enter into the cabinet, and one become prime minister and the president. Now they all have failed in identifying the correct policies and take right initiatives. So in such a context, it is important, parallel to the parliament, to have another institutional entity which basically takes some responsibility in terms of introducing national policies and carry out some of the analysis prior to taking such policies to the parliament. I think we know that in India we have the NITI. NITI in the sense National Institution for Transforming India. Okay, that is an independent authority. Basically, it carry out independent analysis prior to introducing important policy bills. So that is lacking here. That we supposed to have, that we assume that National Planning Department to take that responsibility. But nowadays we don't see that it happens. Independent analysis. So that I think we need to introduce new institutions. Through that we need to basically restrict or have some sort of control that politician all of a sudden changing some policies and or introducing some policies. Rather we need to
have some oversight.
Or have some oversight, at the same time formulate some national policies.
Sure.
Okay, that is a must at this moment. National policies on education, health, exports and other sectors. Now time to time, even the fertilizer ban, you saw that how the government took it and started implementing. Now there were many academics, researchers and other concerned parties who opposed this and who highlighted the limitation in this. But after several months, the President was saying that it was a mistake. But he has done a huge,
irreparable damage.
Yeah, irreparable damage, and as a result, many thousands of farmers suffer today.
Yeah.
Because of that, the act or the action.
All right. We're going for a short commercial break. We'll be right back. Stay with us. Welcome back. You're watching the People's Platform. We are in conversation with Dr. Priyanga Dunusinghe, Senior Lecturer at the University of Colombo. Dr. Dunusinghe, speak to us about the importance of having a wealth tax for Sri Lanka's economic recovery.
Yeah, I think it is really important to get the required tax revenue from those who could pay. Now, at this moment, we know that out of the total tax revenue, around 80%, even over 80%, come through the indirect taxes. Indirect taxes mean, people, regardless of their capacity to pay, have to pay. And as a result, we call that it is disproportionately and disproportionate. And in that context, it is important that we capture the wealth or the income or the ability to the capacity to earn in right way, and accordingly collect the taxes. So the Yahapalana government, I remember they had a plan to reduce the tax composition, like in indirect taxes, through indirect taxes, to have 60% of the taxes total taxes and the rest coming from the direct taxes. Now, if you are to move towards that, certainly the wealth tax is important, as IMF even mentioned at the media brief. It is not easy to introduce a wealth tax, because you need to have some indicators to measure the wealth, and there are a number of issues, but certainly by following the international standards and the practices, Sri Lanka will be able to introduce maybe after, say, at least 2 to 3 years later. Then that will allow to basically tap and get the income that we expect, and at the same time basically get the people who evade taxes, who pay less taxes, to the tax net. And also that implementation mechanism need to be improved. I think the government is planning to go ahead with this electronic, use ICT for improving tax collection and improve the efficiency with respect to tax collection. So with those, I am sure that policy, that decision is to the right direction, I think.
Okay. Speaking about policy reform, an important aspect of this is policy implementation. We often see a gap between policy making and policy implementation. Speak to us about this and how to sort of resolve it.
Yeah, basically, I think it is a good question that most of the time, even the good policies fail at the implementing stage, sometime due to lack of human capital, or the lack of capacities related to the people who are entrusted in implementing such policies, and also due to some of the institutional limitations. So in that context, in particular, the government may find it difficult to carry out some of the reforms, even though we know what to do, if we do not get the required expertise or the experts to carry out such policies. Right. I think in that context, government must tap the local experts and at the same time hire some international experts to carry out the reforms program, and maybe have a separate implementing agencies or the units. Already interim budget proposed one particular unit to undertake restructuring some of the state-owned enterprises. Yeah. So we need certainly some institutions, some experts into those areas to carry out these policies. I do not think that we have enough people in place with enough, with the required qualification or required expertise to carry out reforms. And one of the danger, one of the challenge before us, even though we know what to do, but in case that if we fail to implement it properly, so we may not be able to achieve our targets. In particular, in the area of even the tax reforms, restructuring public and state-owned enterprises, and also promoting exports and promoting tourism. And even the debt restructuring negotiation, it require qualified personnel. Even we have already obtained services from the two international agencies for financial area and the legal side, but still I feel strongly that lack of capacity could derail the reform program.
Coming back, or bringing the conversation back to the IMF and our relationship with the IMF and the need to adhere to the IMF preconditions in order to get a bailout, One of the issues, Dr. Dhanusingha, is that there is no measurability mechanism or accountability mechanism when we look at policy implementation. So what I mean is, if the government in a budget says, okay, we're going to do a certain task, and then they don't do it, nobody holds them accountable for it. But this time it's different, because if the government messes up, we won't get the bailout from the IMF,
yes, yes.
right?
Yes, definitely, definitely. In particular, with respect to the reform package, certainly if government fail to fulfill some of the promises that we make to the IMF, we may not get the bailout package, in the sense like as I mentioned, it will distribute installment wise, so that one, if we fail to, if our progress is not good, so IMF may say, okay, we are not able to disperse that particular tranche. So that is, I think, generally the government is aware of that. What we have the fear that the fear is that after the IMF program, whether some government reverse some of the reforms that we have undertaken. That is what happened. Now, all the time, some who are opponent of the IMF tend to say that we have gone to IMF 16 times, but we have ended up with this crisis. But we must understand all the time, when we go to IMF and we agreed to implement, and when the IMF is here, we implement that, and after the IMF program is over, then we reverse some of those reforms, some of those decisions made. And even you look at what happened to this fuel price formula. Now, it was introduced by the Yahapalana government, and the Yahapalana government actually introduced that as one of the conditions put forward by the IMF. After that program was over, then the previous government, the government came into power in 2019, reverse it. So that is what happened all the time. At least now, this time, we must learn a lesson. I think IMF also stressed that. Recently, the central bank governor also stressed that point at the parliament. I think it is something that we now must push the government to comply with this reform package. And when people also elect members, and I think this is something that they have to pay enough attention. Now, it is true that politicians did all these, politicians are responsible for the current mess. At the same time, people are also responsible, because people elect those members mainly on the basis of their personal gain in most of the time, to get the child admitted to the school or to get a job. You don't have the qualification, but you want to get a job, and for that you elect the person you think who will support. So I think in that context, this is time to reflect on those past mistakes and avoid them in future.
Yeah, because we are a reflection of our people's representatives, right?
Definitely.
Yeah, so I think we also need to look within, even when it comes to these aspects. For example, reducing corruption vulnerabilities through improving fiscal transparency and public financial management. How is the government going to implement that? As in, how is it going to translate into action? It's not like you can. It's not like the IMF is saying, okay, you need to open up a shop here. These are very theoretical constructs which require highly technical, complex methodologies, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, now we have number of institutions that are in place, and also the required laws as such. But what is lacking is the implementation. When it comes to implementation, the same law apply in different way to different people. So if we can avoid that first, and also if we can introduce some of the international practices, anti-corruption practices to Sri Lanka, and also introduce required laws and regulations, I am sure that we can address the situation. And in that context, it is important that individually to avoid corrupt behaviors. Now, people are corrupt, even though whether you agree with me or not, I must say that people are corrupt, and they are, if individually, if we can avoid. Now, if we have the institutional mechanism, and even we, are not able to behave in a corrupt manner. So, that, I mean, as a society, we need to transform. It is not just the politician or the officials who need to get transformed. Even the ordinary citizens of this country must, transform and change their behavior and try to be, uphold to certain principles, anti-corruption principles. Only through that way we can get out of this crisis as a society.
Okay, absolutely wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Priyanka Dunusinghe, Senior Lecturer, Department of Economics, University of Colombo. Thank you.
Thank you.
For being with us on this edition of the People's Platform. Thank you for watching us. We'll see you again on Monday with the Sinhala edition of the People's Platform. Good night.